Hi everyone, it's Nancy Gurdrat. In this chapter, Process Costing, we're going to discuss the differences between process costing and job order costing, and also go over the journal entries for accumulation of the costs, assignment of the cost to work in process, and completion of the cost. We go over how to compute equivalent units and eventually how to prepare a production report for internal purposes that shows how much money we spend and how many units we produce, and therefore arrive at the cost of each unit. Okay, let's go over, first of all, the manufacturing environments that use process cost system. In these type of manufacturing companies, the product is similar to each other, and the company is producing a large number of the same identical product in a continuous fashion, which means the production never stops. So therefore, in order to calculate the cost of one unit, we cannot wait until the production is done, unlike the job order cost system. Job order cost system, we could have waited until the job was done to arrive at the total cost of the job. However, in a process cost system, in this case, we are looking at manufacturing of a bottle of colas. Because the production is going on all the time, they don't close the factory and say, okay, that's it, we're not going to produce anymore, we're done. It's continuously done. In order to calculate the cost of one unit, one bottle of cola, we need to look at one specific period of time, a month, a quarter, a year. And also, what happens is that the product goes through different departments. So the cola, the production of the cola starts with blending the raw materials, and eventually it goes to the next step or next process or next department, which is the filling of the cola in the bottles. And the last department or process for this product is packaging. Now, because the product goes through different processes, we need to keep track of the cost by department. Therefore, we're going to have more than one working process in a process cost system. We're going to have one working process account for blending department, one working process account for filling department, one working process account for packaging department. And once you're done with your cola being packaged, ready to be shipped, then we take that cost out of the last working process and put it into finished goods. And once we sell the finished goods, then the finished goods becomes cost of goods sold, and we will have revenue by receiving cash or the customer putting it on credit. In this slide, we're going to go over the difference between job order cost system and process cost system. First of all, as I mentioned, the number of working process accounts is one of the differences. Job order cost system, no matter how many jobs you worked on, you had only one working process account. In a process cost system, as I mentioned, you will have one working process account for each process, for each department. Now, the name of the document that accumulated the cost of the job under job order cost system was job cost sheet. Under process cost system is called production cost report. determining the total manufacturing cost. For the job order cost system, once the job was done, we could come up with the total cost. In a process cost system, because the production is continuously happening, it does not stop, we need to look at a period of time to determine the cost of manufacturing. To arrive at the unit cost, we looked at the total cost of the job and divided by the units we produce, and that was cost per unit. In a process cost system, we do add up the total manufacturing cost. However, the challenge is the denominator of this equation, how many units we actually produce, because at the end of each period, there are units that are 100% finished, and there are some units that are still sitting in ending work in process. And we have spent money on them, and that cost of material, labor, and overhead is included in total manufacturing costs. Therefore, we have to also come up with a virtual or equivalent units that are considered finished. So we have to convert the unfinished units, the ending work in process, into equivalent finished units. So let me go over an example, and that might make sense to you after finishing the example what we're talking about. So let's look at this example that I have. I'm not going over the journal entries because all the journal entries that you learned in chapter 16 applies to chapter 17, except that when we assign the cost to work in process, there is going to be more than one work in process. There's going to be a work in process, for example, for blending department and one for bottling to assign the materials. The same for labor. There's going to be a work in process in blending and bottling, and therefore factory labor is assigned to each one of those work in process. And overhead is the same. Work in process for blending, bottling are debited, and then work manufacturing overhead the same exact way we calculated manufacturing overhead, which was a predetermined overhead rate times an activity pace. We use it also in chapter 17. The only difference is the fact that since we have more than one work in process, we have to transfer the cost of the previous work in process into the next department. So since bottling comes after blending, the work in process of blending, the $19,000 cost, will be leaving the blending and be added to work in process in bottling. Okay, and eventually, so this journal entry that I'm showing you is an extra one that we never had in job order cost system. So if the product has more than one process, then you're going to have the same journal entry showing that the next process got the cost from the last process work in process, last department's work in process. And eventually the last department, the work in process, once it's finished, goes to finished goods. So that's the only difference between the journal entries in chapter 16 and 17. Now, for explaining what do I mean by equivalent units, let's go over this example. We have a college president that wants to know how much is the cost of instruction for each student. But then we have two different types of student population. We have full-timers and we have part-time students. We have 900 students that are full-time and 1,000 students that are part-time. Part-time student takes 60% of the classes that a full-time student takes during the year. So we need to convert, in a way, the part-timers into equivalent of a full-time student. How do we do that? We multiply the number of part-time students by the percentage of completion, by the percentage of classes that they take compared to full-timers. So the 1,000 part-time students are equivalent to 600 full-time students. Add the 600 to the 900 full-time student, in total are equivalent students that are full-time are 1,500. Therefore, the cost of instruction in the numerator divided by equivalent number of full-time students gives us the cost of instruction per student being $6,000. So the challenge in this chapter is converting the ending working process, the unfinished jobs, like the part-time students, into finished jobs, equivalent finished job. So let me look at an example for you. First of all, we always might have some units sitting in working process. In your homework, a lot of the homework starts with 0. If they don't give you units in beginning working process, then assume it's 0. In this example, the units, physical units, units that you can actually see and touch, as of June 1st, that's the beginning of the month, were 100,000 units. And then they started during the month of June another 800,000 units. So in total, we need to keep track of what happened to the total 900,000 units. Now, if 700,000 of those units were transferred from the mixing department to the next department, that means out of the 900,000 units, 700,000 were finished for this department. Therefore, we still have 200,000 units to keep track of in the ending working process. So this equation always needs to be kept, meaning beginning working process plus units started into production must always equal units transferred out plus ending working process units. So if you could remember this is going to help you in homework. So beginning working process in units or units in beginning working process is the same thing, plus units started must always equal units transferred out plus ending working process. Excellent. So now, when we give you an example, there are two methods that we can calculate how many equivalent units have been finished. One method that the chapter uses is called weighted average method. It doesn't make a distinction between whether we finished beginning working process first or the units that we started into production first. And it's used, it's most widely used in practice. The other method is called first in, first out, which is discussed in chapter 17 appendix, and you're not responsible for that. We will not cover first in, first out method. In the first in, first out method, the concept is that let's finish the beginning working process first, and then we finish the units that we started. So because of the fact that we're not going to use first in, first out.